Hey everyone, back to digging into our current policy stack here at Vanta. And today we'll be starting with the secure development policy. With me, as always, I have Matt Cooper, our in house subject matter expert on all things security and compliance. And so, Matt, let me give it to you to kind of give a high level of this policy, and then we can dig into the various sections from there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Caitlin. Hey, folks. All right. For this particular policy, in terms of rooting it in a framework, I'm going to reference the ISO framework because ISO has a number of specific controls around secure development. The control language is pretty high level, but this is a place where I would strongly recommend if you're not sure what to do or what's expected, that you look at the guidance. So that can be found in the ISO 27002 document, because the guidance will give you a lot of very helpful detail around what you could be doing for the various controls. So with that, I'm just going to roll through sort of at a high level, and then I'll relate them to some of these ISO controls. For folks who want to find them in ISO in the newest 2022 version, in the Annex A, these are at the end of section 8. So it's like 8, Annex 8.25, 8.26, 0.27, 0.29, 8.30, 8.31, and 32. 33 a little bit also. So you can hear there's like quite a few of them. All right, so let's go through it. The first one is change management. So this is a control that should be, familiar to folks. It's changes to the system. The really like the bottom line here is, or the bottom line is, you do not want a single individual to be able to create and then push changes on their own without some sort of dual approval or some sort of review of their code. That gives that person too much power to do something potentially malicious, to make a mistake, or to have their account, taken over or compromised, and then that account having too much power to push things into your environment. And that should apply both to code that affects your application as well as your infrastructure. So you want to have some sort of like a peer review process on that code. How you define that is up to you, but that's sort of like the minimum bar, I would say. And if you have a more detailed change procedure, you could delineate it in your policy. You could link out to something that's more tactical, like a procedure if you want. Lots of different ways you could put it into policy, but you want to have at least, something there to anchor that you're doing effective change management. Okay, so let's keep going down. Version control is really like a subset of change management. I don't think I need to talk about that, specifically, but also something you just want to pay attention to. The older versions of ISO specifically called out this scenario where you would like upgrade the underlying operating system. That's not going to be relevant as much for more modern, computing enterprises where you're containerized, you're not really doing that. So if that's not relevant for you, you could scope it out of your SOA. But if it is, you want to just consider it and really just think about any changes that are made to your production environment that could affect, confidentiality, integrity, or availability. They need to be controlled. Okay. Let's keep going down here. Technical review of applications after operating platform changes. That's just what I mentioned. Restrictions on changes to software packages. So what ISO says here, let's see if I can find it. Essentially they say you should discourage changing packages. And but if you do, there's like a certain, set of a certain set of considerations that you should go through. And you can find those again in the guidance for ISO 27002. I'm not gonna outline all of those here. But we have some language in the standard to make you, think about making sure you have those controls in your system. Okay, next one is secure engineering principles. So the principles language is engineering secure systems should be established, documented, maintained, and applied to any information system development activities. So that's it. It really says you need to apply principles. It doesn't say what they need to be. It's not particularly prescriptive. If you look through the guidance of this control, there's a lot more detail of what it could include. And you'll have to decide what's right for you, based on your own maturity, what you can do. And then you can always go back and continue to strengthen this, as you go forward. There's a lot of, technical detail here. And so if you're not familiar with what this might look like, I strongly recommend that you read the ISO guidance. Okay, and then there are, of course, we've extracted some things into the template to give you like a helpful starting point. Those are not requirements, by the way, and so you should definitely modify those to be accurate for your environment, as always with policy. Okay, the secure development environment is the next section. The ISO control that's relevant here is A831, separation of development, test, and production environments. Development, testing, and production environments should be separated and secured. So that's the high level principle is you want to not be doing testing in your production environment. You want to have separate environments, and then you want to have a reasonable level of control around your testing and or staging environments. Now, depending on what sort of test data you're using, it's another control. If you're using dummy data, right, so that you have no production data in your development environment and you have no connection between your development environment and your production environment, then you could reasonably have like a more permissive security posture around your development environment. More engineers could have more access to just do their work because the risk would be lower. So you have to, figure out what's happening in your environment. Obviously, if you are using any kind of production data in test, first off, make sure you're doing that appropriately. And then secondly, just understand you're going to have a higher level of security in that case around your development environment as well. Okay, moving on from there. Outsourced development. This is kind of obvious, but in ISO, it says that the organization should direct, monitor, and review the activities related to outsourced system development. So there you have it. The control is very high level. That's what you should be doing with in-house development as well, but they specifically call it out to make you think about, hey, when we're outsourcing development, do we need, separate levels of control? And a couple of those reasons might be, if you're outsourcing development, maybe you have less control over the endpoint that it was created on. Maybe you have, less control over the staff that were actually doing the work and what their backgrounds and qualifications are, right? It just depends. And it's reasonable to think if you have less control over the environment that it was developed in and the personnel that are doing the development, you may need more levels of testing before you bring in and incorporate that code into your production environment. That's what they're trying to call out. Okay. Moving on from that, there is, controls around, testing for vulnerabilities in your application and in your code, and then handling those vulnerabilities when they are identified. So tracking them through remediation. And just doing security testing as well in your process. So the language for the ISO control here, 829, security testing processes should be defined and implemented in the development lifecycle. So you can see there the control language is extremely high level. It's up to you to define how you're going to do that appropriately for your environment. And the guidance gives you a bunch of different ideas for, how you could do it and at different levels of maturity. Okay. Protection of test data. We talked about that a bit. The best practice is to use, absolutely dummy data in test. And all the control says is test information should be appropriately selected, protected, and managed. Again, pretty high level. Acquisition of third-party systems and software. The idea here is you need to, define appropriate security requirements when you're acquiring third-party systems and software. This could be, at the level of you're just, acquiring a SaaS tool for your business. So at that level, it could also have to do with software supply chain and using third-party libraries in your own software, depending on what what level you're doing. There's a bunch of suggested controls in the guidance here. Next item is developer training. So making sure that you have the processes in place to reasonably ensure that your folks are competent and understand security, those who are doing the development. And then that is pretty much it.